Well, this is going to be a tough commentary to do because I really don't remember much about making this episode. I finished making weather warnings and I found just a big pile of junk in the storage area and a broken window and a bunch of debris outside. And I also found a nice little present. I found a complete new archive episode, so that was kind of nice. But in all seriousness, though, Ben here, obviously, from the archive, double obviously, for the final episode of the second season. And this is, of course, the Y2K Apocalypse Party. And this, like the Aimvest video commentary, is a time capsule commentary in that I'm recording this before the episode has premiered. And I'm doing this pretty much for the same reason that I did the Aimvest video one so soon, because I wanted to discuss this while it was still fresh on my mind. And indeed, this is a pretty long episode, but it would have been a really, really long episode had I really gone into detail on all the figures behind all this stuff and so on and so forth. So instead of that, a commentary just seemed like a good idea. And of course, with these VHS Vault episodes, as I've said many times, I'm always at the mercy of the pacing of the videos that I choose. And this one isn't too bad, but it's still a 27-minute episode. So had I really gone that deep into it, it would have been a very long, very boring 50-minute episode. Music, and more right here. So I guess the first order of business would be, how did I arrive at this conclusion here that I'd not only want to do Y2K, but I'd want to do it from the perspective of someone in 1999. So, I mean, I knew that I wanted to do Y2K at the end of the season because, end of the season apocalypse, it's a nice, good, happy, feel-good way to end things. So I knew I wanted to do this, but the more I thought about Y2K, the more I thought, man, I'm always Monday morning quarterbacking doing archive. But in this case, it would be really, really blunt. I mean, if I really did this from a 2014 perspective, it's just going to be me saying, oh, look at those stupid people from the late 90s. Oh, ha, 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 how superior am I? So I decided that it would probably be a lot more interesting and certainly a little more original. That's unusual for me. To do it from the perspective of somebody in 1999. So it became a game of, okay, well, how do I get to this point? And I knew that like I said, I knew I wanted this to be the last episode of the season, but once I had the lead up to it complete, I knew that I wanted to do weather warnings before this. That, okay, I can figure out a way to get from point A to point B with this. And so I was playing with it, and as I was writing the script, I was just kicking myself more and more that I didn't save a lot of the stuff that I had taped as a kid and the stuff off the radio that I had and all that. So, and I acknowledged that during the episode, and I really do play everything I've got, the little bit during the Unsolved Mysteries rerun, and the bit at the beginning where you see my little crappy tape recorder, which doesn't even really work anymore. That there was a little bit of, shall we say, post-production magic involved in that one. So with that, I thought, okay, this would be great. Then I can be really up about getting some new stuff because it's a dark day out. Let's just have a tornado warning or something. That'll give me an excuse to get all crazy about it and try and capture as much of it as possible. Then I realized, oh, I've got a camcorder. I can film this too. Oh, great, great, great. And so it just kind of went from there. And then I think the real big turning point was when I was looking for tapes and stuff supposedly to take care of this with, that it would just be kind of sweet justice that I get my ass handed to me by a bunch of cardboard boxes, because the guy that hangs out behind the cardboard box all the time, there's nothing funny about that. So that's how I did it. I figured, okay, well, I'll be looking for stuff and then I'll have all these boxes fall on me and then I'll I'll take a good bump to the head from it and wake up and think it's 1999. Evangelists Peter and Paul Lalonde. So here's where this episode would have gotten inordinately long, in that if I really discussed a lot of the personalities like I kind of wanted to, it would have been a problem. Now, I do discuss the Lalonde brothers quite a bit in this, but that's because the Left Behind tape on this just doesn't make as much sense otherwise. Not that it makes a whole ton of sense on its own. But one thing I found really interesting about the whole thing was the fact that the authors of the Left Behind books are not credited anywhere on the video case or on the program itself. But on the other hand, I think the Lalondes kind of reckon themselves to be film producers, and they seem to have a certain thing for science fiction. So when the real movie of Left Behind was finally made, they started Cloud 10 Pictures, and the authors, of course, were brought on board, but they're not mentioned anywhere on here. So I'm thinking maybe it was just an oversight, because I don't think the movie would have been made, especially with them, if there was much of any bad blood between the two parties. So I've really been perplexed by this. On the one hand, I know that these guys seem to have a thing for science fiction, but on the other, I just really can't help but escape this nagging feeling that they were really trying to sell the idea of a rapture making this, despite this trailer for this other movie at the beginning. The way that they're so intentionally vague, but also so deathly serious about it, and the so-called experts that they bring in for most of the videotape. The tape is, I think it's 75 minutes long, and the first 20 minutes is a very, very condensed version of Left Behind up until the rapture. And then from there, it's this really, really long, boring group sermon. But a lot of the people that turn up are people that had claimed that the rapture was coming, and that seemed to really believe it, or at the very least thought they could make a quick buck off of it. So it becomes a really odd place with this video, in that, again, I really wasn't quite sure if they were taking this seriously or not. But the track records would almost suggest otherwise. In the shot here, a proven... So on the one side of the coin, you've got people like the Lalonde brothers, who just seem to be out to make a quick buck. Maybe they believe in the rapture, but either way, they're going to be comfortable ahead of it. So on the other hand is a person that actually wound up having a pretty big impact on how I made this episode, and he doesn't even appear in it. And the only trace of him is in a commercial that I show for a pamphlet called What in the World Will Happen Next, which I'll get to in a bit. But the guy's name was Ray Brubaker, and he had this really pioneering cable TV show. It was an evangelical news broadcast called God's News Behind the News, and it was a 700 Club sort of thing. And watching it, I found that one of his newscasts he apparently thought was really, really important and wanted it to be seen as widely as possible. And so somebody in his camp decided to issue it on home video, and it's called Countdown to Nuclear Midnight, and it's from 1993. And it's the whole idea behind it is, yes, the Berlin Wall is down. Yes, the USSR is crumbled, but we still need to be really paranoid about the Russians. So watching that, it's not a riffable movie. It has its absurdist moments, but it's not something that you'd really ever want to watch on archive. But on top of that, and probably most importantly of all, is the fact that the more I watched, and I got interested in this guy, Brubaker, and I started looking around, and he passed away in 2006, I believe. But I found a bunch of obituaries on him, and I found some interviews with his kids. And I found a guy that, on the one hand, he wanted to be a journalist. He really honestly wanted to be a journalist. But on the other hand, was so far into his own faith that, there were going to be problems. I mean, you can make all the media bias jokes you want, but with this guy, it's really teetering on the edge of mental illness. But reading the interviews with his family, it's like he's this guy that was so far into his own comfort zone and had such a narrow outlook on the world that you just didn't dare want to shake it because he might not be able to handle it. And excuse me, I think it's also kind of funny that he was, on the one hand, pretty ahead of his time with diving headfirst into cable TV, and he had a pretty decent setup for somebody who was obviously on a very low budget. But he, according to his family, was somebody who, like, he was afraid of the microwave. He really was afraid of pretty much everything technological. He was totally dependent on his wife, and so the upshot of all this is that it got me thinking that there really were people that really truly believed that the rapture was coming, and that it wasn't really about the money. It wasn't about any sort of personal gain. And so I tried to take that into account with this. Although having said that, the ones that I chose for this video were so blatantly money makers that I wasn't going to let them go. But it did give me that outlook that, there are two sides to this issue. Now, that ad that I mentioned, What in the World Will Happen Next, Brubaker is not in it. I believe it's his son-in-law that's actually in it giving the pitch. But at one point, I admit I am absolutely not a biblical scholar, and I was a C science student at best. So there's a point at which in the commercial where it's talking about the rapture, what is the rapture, what is the tribulation, and what is the millennium? And I'm thinking, the millennium? Is this some sort of variation on the word that I don't know about here? So I started looking it up, and I found nothing. I really went into it, and I found that it was just a mistake on their part, but one that was symptomatic of a greater problem, in that they were so into their own belief system that they didn't even bother to look up the word millennium, or I thought maybe it was some sort of plural version, like millennia. Who knows? So I just, I was on the one hand perplexed, and on the other hand, I just thought it was hilarious, and it wound up in the episode, and I've just spent 5 minutes talking about 1 minute of this episode. Oh, good for me.
Look, not beyond.
So this brings us down to the last tape on here, and that would be Millennium Fears Fact or Fiction. I know it's still about 5 minutes out in the episode, but, I'm going to discuss it anyway. And, of course, Charies E. Sellier was the man behind it, and he wrote the book The Life and Times of Grizzly Adams in 1972, which caused, I guess you could say, a short-lived TV series based on it, and a couple of TV movies, and he's best remembered now for Silent Night, Deadly Night. Then he turned around and started his evangelical film/documentary company, so, draw whatever conclusions you want to from that. And one thing I couldn't discuss about Sellier in the episode, because I wanted it to be pretty strictly from a 1999 point of view, Sellier died in 2009, and Grizzly Adams Productions still exists. I guess you could say the website's still there, but it doesn't look like there's any new productions going on. It looks like it's just a place where you can license stuff to show on TV, or if you want to have a screening of it somewhere. So, like I said, that's one thing that was kind of a problem with this episode. As much as I think I got it right, I couldn't quite give the history lesson that I wanted to, because I wanted to keep it accurate as being from a 1999 point of view. And of course, lots of stuff has happened since 1999. But the tape proper, Millennium Fears Fact or Fiction, was kind of an anomaly in terms of VHS vault, in that most of the stuff I show, I wind up showing more than I want to, because I want it to make sense. So, on fashion videos, The Secret of Wearing a Kilt, that wound up being, almost 12 minutes long, and it's not because I wanted it to be, but you're at the mercy of the slow pacing of the tape, and then if you want to make sense, you have to leave a bunch of stuff in, so that's how that wound up being really long. But Millennium Fears was very, very different from that, in that I probably could have just done the whole thing. It's almost an hour long. It was obviously meant to be a TV special of some sort. I'm sure it aired somewhere. I don't know where. Maybe PAX, if you remember that channel, PAX, back in the late 90s. And there's a lot of religious bent to it. There's a lot of the whole evangelical thing going on, kind of like with Left Behind. But I knew that I'd already given that part of the whole concept its due with Left Behind and with this commercial here. So I wanted to focus on strictly the technological end of it. Although I think I mentioned that it does have a religious bent to it, but the whole thing about Y2K, everybody remembers that it's mostly the technological stuff. All the computers are going to crash and all that. So I obviously decided to run with that, and that's how it got to be the family sketches in there. And there's actually one or two more of them over the course of the video, but I picked what I felt were not just the funniest, but the most pertinent ones. But the entire tape is just kind of this symphony of crazy. There really isn't any other way to describe it. It's got alternately this really heavy melodramatic music, and at other times this really too light kind of faux classical stuff going on, like you hear in the family sketches. And there's these sketches in there that don't make sense. There's like a 6-minute bit about Nostradamus and King Henry II in there, basically saying that, well, Nostradamus somehow predicted King Henry II's demise. Well, he's a prophet, and here's this Y2K thing. And I'm not, I don't know much about Nostradamus, admittedly, but I don't know, maybe he called Y2K, but it doesn't seem like it got mentioned in the video. I'd have to go back and look at it again. But the way it's presented is so random that it becomes kind of a moot point. And the family sketches this incredibly stupid family that is somehow considered to be a shining example of America done right. Oh, and this, I have never laughed so hard at anything in VHS Vault than at the copy protection bit. That is not my doing. That is really there on the tape. I was on the floor. I thought, this is just too perfect. How am I going to react to this? Obviously, they had a lot of faith in everything crashing at Y2K, you know? So, and then just these characters, this guy, Jim Lord, who just seems a little off his rocker. And it's just, like I said, the whole tape is just this 7-layer dip of crazy. So, I don't know. Maybe I'll have to see if I can't figure out a way to get a little more of it out there. It's long out of print. And it obviously is out of print. Who'd want to see it now except crazy people like me? The tape, I really did get it sealed in the thrift store bin, which I thought was a great little bit in itself. Also, somebody lacked the appropriate faith. And indeed, I wanted to film a sequence with it still sealed, kind of an unboxing sort of thing, but I scrapped it because it would have had to have been done separately, because obviously anybody that watches this knows that these are not the unadulterated tapes. These are very, very condensed versions of the tapes. So obviously I couldn't do that without it being very, very jarring in an editing sense, even by Oddity archive standards.
All the computers and embedded computers.
So getting back to the making of this episode proper, I was actually kicking around the idea of filming this on the original camcorder that Archive used to be done with the High 8 camcorder. But I figured that I was almost afraid that nobody would get that I had it knocked into my head that it was 1999 again. And the only way I could get the date on screen and have it look real, have it look decent, was with the VHS camcorder. So I decided to go with that, and it wound up kind of setting some other things in motion and thinking that, well, maybe I can make this a concept on its own. How would Archive have been in 1999? It probably would have been relegated to public access, and it would have been, I probably would have viewed it as a lot more cutting edge as opposed to being this show that's just ever so slightly behind the times. So I had that going for it, and then just that stupid VHS camcorder of mine. I'm sure there's people out there that like it and that like the kind of texture of it, but it's a real pain in the ass to try and film that when you don't have a cameraman. Because how I'm able to make archive work so much is with the handy cam, because I can flip the screen and I can monitor myself as I'm filming. And the only way I could monitor myself with the VHS thing is if I ran it out to the TV, in which case you'd have the TV humming away in the background. And not only that, me looking way off to make sure that the framing was okay. So I basically just had to get to the point where I would have it okay, but have a little bit of leeway, and then I'd have to go back and just really crop down the picture just to make it work. And so that's how that worked. And whenever I film anything with the VHS camcorder, it takes a much longer time than it does with the handy cam because I don't know. And so I just wind up taking take after take after take of it, and I don't have that safety net of being able to monitor myself as I'm doing it. So it's always a maddening experience to do the VHS camcorder, and I wouldn't be surprised if I just might not ever do that again. It would have to be a pretty damn good excuse at this point.
Chips.
Now, filming the final sequence of this episode was truly an experience. Like I said, with the whole VHS camcorder thing, it was very hard to... I was just taking on faith that I was at a decent place in the shot. And there's the focus issues that are in there too. But I knew that I needed a way to come down from 1999 back to 2014. And so I don't even remember how I came to the idea that, oh, great, the Millennium crash isn't going to happen. I'm hungry. Good thing I stocked up on canned goods. And I don't really remember how I got to that. But I had the idea that I should probably come out of this little bit of this little mental detour of mine the same way I went in, by taking a blow to the head. And so it was a hard sequence to do with the can opener and hitting myself in the head with it. And I tried to rehearse that pretty good beforehand, and I thought I had it down, but it just wasn't happening when I was filming, because you need that kind of clink, that thunk when it hits you, and I just wasn't getting it. Or I'd get so into trying to deliver the actual lines that I'd miss, or I'd stop short or whatever. And so the take that you see is the one time that my hand really did slip and I really did whack myself in the head pretty good. So it's a good, genuine reaction, but there's a few lines missing in there. But it wound up being the final take because it was the only one that was even remotely believable. Of course, you definitely hear it, and it takes me a few seconds, more than it would have in a rehearsed take, to get back to where I could be. At least I was able to hold it together well enough to at least try and finish it. So that's going to be probably my big memory of making Y2K, getting whacked in the head with a can opener and really suffering a nice little headache afterwards. I'm okay now. Don't worry about me. Not that you ever would, you heartless bastards. And Charies E. Sellier. So I'm pretty well out of things to say about this episode, so I'm just going to wrap it up here a few minutes early. But before I go, I do want to say thank you to everybody for this season. I think it's gone really well. I'm looking forward very much to season 3. And, just on and on and on we go. See you soon.